Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ned Bellavance, Ned1313, wherever it was available. And this is the daily check in for April 9th, 2020. So, this is my daily live stream that I try to do at 11:30 Eastern Time every day of the regular work week. And this is the one for April 9th. Our topic today was voted on by the Twitterati out there, and I basically put forth four potential topics for today's stream. When I checked this morning, the current winning one was managed Kubernetes and the marketplace thereof. So that is going to be the topic for today. When I checked just before this show, it's now tied with two of the other options at 26.3% for each of them. So obviously there was interest in all four topics, and I will get to all four topics. As always, I have the chat open. If you happen to stumble across this live stream while I'm live streaming, throw a question in there, throw a comment. I want to see how you're doing. I see I'm up to a big six subscribers. That's exciting. At least I know you six got notified when I went live. I've also tweeted it out. So, if you get a chance to join me, awesome. If not, that's fine too. I love to know that people are watching and hopefully getting some amount of information out of this. So, with that in mind, let's check in. How are you? Everything going okay? I know it's a rough week. We made it past the halfway mark. The weekend is in sight. Granted, the weekend doesn't seem that much different than the week right now. It's not like you got to go anywhere during the week, and it's not like you're really going to go anywhere during the weekend. But if you do have the opportunity, I know that we as a family are planning to go to a nature preserve that has some trails to walk on. Hopefully, it won't be too crowded. If we get there and there's a ton of people, we're going to be like, pass. But we have our face masks already, and we're going to go out and walk in nature a little bit because it's kind of beautiful out right now. If you don't have that option, I'm sorry for bringing it up. But if you do, get out. Just getting out for 30 minutes a day. I read something from a psychologist yesterday. Getting out for 30 minutes a day can make a tremendous difference in your mental attitude for the remainder of the day. So that's my check in. That's my mental health advice. Hopefully, that's helpful for you. Let's get to the topic at hand, and that is managed Kubernetes. So I want to put a few demarcations out there before we dive into managed Kubernetes. Number one, I'm not going to talk about the big cloud vendors. Yes, AWS, Google, Azure, Alibaba, they all have a managed Kubernetes service, but that service does not exist outside of their cloud for the most part. It is a managed service within their cloud. So if you want to consume it, you go to AWS and consume it. You go to Azure and spin up an AKS cluster. That's how you consume it. That's not super interesting to me. There are some differences between them, but the thing that's emerging and is more interesting to me is the managed Kubernetes market that applies to private cloud, also to public cloud to a certain degree. You might want to spin up your own Kubernetes cluster within AWS or Azure or wherever and have somebody else manage that. That's not one of the big cloud providers. And there are some benefits to that I can talk about later if we have time. But that's the market that actually interests me at the moment. I'm like, okay, yes, you can do the public clouds and there are some differences, but let's focus on what's going on with the managed Kubernetes services. So there are a bunch of players out there already, and I just want to go over them very briefly. I don't know a ton about every single one, but I have received some briefings from them or been familiar with their products in the past. So broadly, you've got Mirantis, and Mirantis was doing managed OpenStack. And then Docker sold a big chunk of their business, this sort of Docker enterprise business, to Mirantis. And so now, ostensibly, Mirantis is also in the business of doing managed Kubernetes deployments. From what I hear, when they were doing managed OpenStack, they were doing a good job of it. So I got to assume that they're probably doing a fairly good job of managed Kubernetes. So that's one. Another one is Platform 9. I actually got a briefing from them as an analyst, and I may do a write-up later. I haven't had a chance to test drive their software, but it seems to make a lot of sense. You basically install their agent on the boxes that are going to become your Kubernetes cluster. And then from their SaaS portal, you go and say, hey, I want to actually deploy this thing, and it deploys it. It seems pretty straightforward. The next one is Red Hat OpenShift, and it's arguable whether this could be considered truly managed since you're actually responsible for managing OpenShift, but it is a deployment that uses Kubernetes, and you're receiving support from Red Hat, which is now owned by IBM. The product is solid. Version 4 is out. I would be cautious about that for one reason, and that's IBM bought Red Hat. And the good news is they've taken some of the Red Hat top executives and pushed them up in the org structure for IBM. And the head of IBM, the CEO, she actually stepped down and is being replaced by not someone from Red Hat, but someone who helps orchestrate that Red Hat purchase. So with that in mind, that's is a glimmer of hope, but also I'm just concerned about what IBM might do to OpenShift. So if you haven't deployed it, I don't know, maybe you let it shake out for a few months. vSphere 7 that just came out has a Kubernetes component to it. The thing with that is you have to also have VCF, which is VMware Cloud Foundation. If you don't have that, you can't do the Kubernetes on vSphere 7. It's not completely managed. So again, just like OpenShift, you're responsible for the care and feeding of it. However, you get the support and the deployment help from VMware and any of their consultants and VARs that do that sort of work, systems integrators. Day 2 IQ, which used to be Mesosphere, but they changed their name to Day 2 IQ, has a managed Kubernetes offering. They still have their Mesos offering as well, but they're kind of not backing away from DCOS, but they have added on that Kubernetes component. So that's exciting. Anthos from Google has the ability to deploy Google Kubernetes engine in your on-prem environment. So it's managed by Google, or at least you can manage it, as I understand it, through the Google Cloud Console. But that's another option. Canonical, creators of Ubuntu, which you're probably familiar with, also has their variation on managed Kubernetes where you can deploy Kubernetes on Ubuntu and manage it. I don't have a whole lot of details about that, but it's something I should probably dive into at some point. And lastly, Rancher has their management platform as well as RKE, which is their Kubernetes deployment. So very quickly, those are some options. There's also a bunch of different public clouds that have their own flavor of managed Kubernetes, but I'm more concerned with what's going on premises. And I did mention before, one of the advantages of using one of these over going directly to a public cloud offering is you have a consistent management plane across all of your different Kubernetes deployments. And if you're expecting some level of sprawl, that could be a consideration. One I forgot on the list is Weaveworks, which also does sort of a GitOps thing with Kubernetes management that could be also worth looking into. So, like I said, it's becoming a crowded marketplace. Definitions are a little fast and loose, but the important thing is it is a growing marketplace, and it's one that you should probably keep in mind. So, with all that kind of percolating in the back of your head, what are some things, some characteristics that you might want to keep in mind when you're evaluating these? Number one, I would say, is what level of a managed service do you actually need? Do you want to just stand up the bare metal servers, drop an agent on there, and now everything else about your Kubernetes cluster is managed by whatever vendor you went with? Okay, so if that's the level that you're looking for, then that's going to narrow down your options a bit. And, there is a certain amount of lock-in that's inevitable if you're going down that path. But it's important to understand at what level you want the management to be. The next thing is, should it be agent-based? So that's a question. People have different feelings about installing an agent on your virtual machine or your bare metal server. Some people really don't like the agent. So if you don't like an agent, that's going to also restrict your selection of who's out there. Another one is, where does the control plane live? And by that, I'm actually talking about the master nodes for a cluster. Do those master nodes live on the same hardware and in the same data center as your worker nodes, or is that being run out of the cloud somewhere and only the worker nodes are running locally? Could be some issues if you lose internet connectivity and that control plane can no longer talk to the worker nodes, and the worker nodes will still keep chugging away and do what they do, but you won't be able to make any updates until that connectivity comes back. So again, another thing to consider is, where's the control plane living? Does the solution federate all of your various Kubernetes clusters together so that you can manage them, and someone who has access to those clusters can use the same identity across all of them? There's a new Kubernetes Federation spec that's out there. I haven't had a chance to look at it really deeply, but a question that might come up is, does it match that Kubernetes Federation spec? So again, another question to think about when you're surveying this marketplace. And then the last thing that I would delve into is, can I develop policies that work across multiple clusters? So if I have a standard set of security configurations that I want applied to all of my Kubernetes clusters, is that something I can do at the management level of this managed service and just know that it's going to be automatically applied to all of my clusters? Can I be more granular? Can I create like organization groups of clusters? This is my prod cluster, so I need this additional policy put upon it. Can I do that? Are they all using the same authentication source or identity source for authentication to that cluster? Ideally, they would. Ideally, they would integrate with like Okta or Azure AD, or whatever service you're using for identity, and just integrate seamlessly with that and support two-factor authentication and all that kind of good stuff. So again, if you're thinking about all these different options, or you're thinking about all the different market offerings out there, those are some things that you should probably be thinking about when you're evaluating managed Kubernetes offerings. So those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did I miss something? Is there a player in the market that I didn't mention? Is there a top subtopic around this that you want me to dive deeper into? I'm happy to do that on a future daily check-in, but I think that's my time. That's going to wrap it up for today. There is a podcast version of this that is now available on Google Podcast as well as on the Anchor FM website. So I can include a note for that in the links. And until tomorrow, stay healthy and stay safe, everybody. Thanks.